Good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name is Rachel Abraham. I am a graduate of the Robinson School of Business 2019. And welcome to Best of the Blue. The Best of the Blue is a masterclass series developed for alumni and by alumni. Join your fellow Panthers for a unique professional and personal journey led by alumni and friends of Georgia State, focused on the greatest investment, yourself. So for today, we do have some questions through our Q&A button, as well as through our Facebook Live and YouTube channel. We'll check on those questions, but we'll have about 10 minutes at the end for Q&A. So the Young Alumni Council is our host for this event series, and YAC is Young Alumni Council focused to provide the under 40 demographic with social service and networking opportunities to really bridge the gap between graduation and alumni status. So we are really happy to be here. I am so excited to welcome you all to our guest speaker this evening, longtime friend of mine, Munir Minjani. He is so amazing. So I have to share a little bit of a bio about him and his background and why he's come to join us this evening. He's a progressive thinker and social and civic entrepreneur that's used his professional experience and heavy community involvement to make connections and bring diverse groups of folks together within Atlanta. He is a serial entrepreneur and commercial real estate broker, and very involved in the nonprofit sector, specifically in the arts, education, and interfaith. He sits on and chairs several boards throughout the region, often being the first and paving the path for others along the way. He was honored as the first ever 40 under 40 by Emory University and the inaugural 40 under 40 Georgia Muslims by the Islamic Speakers Bureau. His motivation comes from the mantra he adopted as an early age, which is so impressive. I can't do all the service the world needs, but the world needs all the service I can do. Munir graduated from Emory University in 2010 with a BA in psychology, focusing on sociology and philosophy. He's also a dear friend to Georgia State. He has sat on the Rialto Center for Arts and has also been a speaker for a number of events over at Robinson. So Munir, welcome. We're so happy to have you join us. And I think back to just the years of our friendship and why you make such a great speaker on this topic around the art of small talk. And specifically, we'll get into navigating social anxiety with these in-person events that have been popping up on our calendar increasingly. And I've always looked to you as someone that always knows the right thing to say, always knows everyone in the room. And lately you've been sharing some stories with me that have really come as a surprise. I've always seen you as this social butterfly that is completely unfazed, and have come to you, especially in my times throughout business school, trying to navigate how to network and how to not be awkward and anxious. And what's amazing to me is that you have and continue to experience the same thing despite your impressive background and just your effortless demeanor. So one story in particular I'd love for you to share as we start this conversation is around that debate story in school.
Yeah, first I'm gonna have to pay you all of your money for that introduction. I sincerely appreciate it. And it's great to be back with the Georgia State folks, and I've always enjoyed our interactions, either through the MBA program or just the ones that we have personally as well. So yeah, the debate story is one that I like to share because so often when you do these, conversations about the small, art of small talk or talking about anxiety, you have someone who's so extroverted and is this, true social butterfly that the people on the other end are like, well, of course they don't have any issue with this, right? And people see me and also often think that. And so I like to share the struggles that I had with it and going through high school. And even when I was younger, my dad's a preacher and Asian father, literally almost took me to therapy because I didn't talk enough and because I was so shy. And that's a lot for an Asian dad to be like, my son needs to go to therapy because he's not speaking enough, right? So that tells
Seriously.
you the level of, where I was. But like a lot of Indian kids, I joined debate and went off to a debate tournament. And literally for an entire year, almost every weekend or every other weekend when we would be at a debate tournament, I would get sick to my stomach, find myself in the bathroom, literally throwing up because I was so nervous about doing debate. And when I came home, the question was never like, oh, did you win today? How did you do? It was just simply, did you even debate? And that took a year for me to get used to in kind of what I call like some self-induced gluttony for punishment, right? And exposure therapy, I guess. I learned that I was doing exposure therapy on myself much later in my psychology classes, but it took me a year of every single weekend almost getting up and being so nervous often on stage. And this stage was only 3 people in the audience, and one of them was your partner, right? And the 2 opposing debaters and a judge. That's all it was. And it made me so nervous that I would get sick, but I kept doing it and kept doing it. So, I'm very familiar with anxiety. Even now, Rachel and I were at a wedding this 2 weekends ago for a dear friend of ours, someone that we've known for over a decade and a half at this point. Most of the people there were folks that we've known for, over a dozen years. And we had 3 events over the course of the week. And every time I pulled up to an event or was getting for an event, I would still have that social anxiety, right? There were so many times where I sat in the car, drove there, and then just sat in the parking lot or sat in the Uber for an extra minute to kind of gather myself, to prep myself to go in, because that social anxiety still stays with me today. And so while I've learned a lot of ways to get over it, which I'm excited to share, it doesn't mean that it completely goes away. It's something that you just continuously deal with, but it gets better and lessens over time for sure.
Wow. So what did you learn through that experience then? And like, I guess what has changed through this series of exposure therapy over the years?
Yeah. So the biggest thing that I think, because I studied social anxiety a lot because I was so curious about it, I actually participated in a study coincidentally at Georgia State in regards to it as well. And you think about the reasons that people have anxiety, right? One, I don't want folks to think that I'm stupid or I'm an idiot. I don't want to be judged. People are going to talk about me. I don't know what to say. Everyone else in the room is much smarter than I am. And you start learning that more people than just you feel that way. As a matter of fact, the majority of the population does. The fear of speaking rates higher year after year than death and spiders. And I'm deathly afraid of spiders. And yet the fear of speaking always tops that. So the first thing that's most important to know is that you are not alone. Even someone like me who gets classified as an extrovert, I'm really an introvert, as a social butterfly, I'm really not, gets that anxiety. And I have that anxiety too. And so you're not alone in that. And there are a lot of ways that now, because I have these tips and tricks that I walk into meetings with, that I walk into events with, it makes me feel a lot more comfortable because I feel that I'm prepared for it. So I always think about what the situation is, what is my goal, setting small goals. So if I'm going to a networking event where I'm doing something in commercial real estate, which is what I do professionally, I will take with me maybe 5 business cards and say, my goal today is to give out 5 cards to individuals who actually want it, and to gather 3 contacts from individuals that I can reach out to. And I'll start off small. And so I'll just start that. And then I find that once I get into the rhythm, I observe myself and I'm like, okay, it's not that bad. Oh, that wasn't that bad. Oh, that was a great conversation. Oh, I'm getting leads. And then it starts to slowly cycle and your fears of XYZ go away once you've acknowledged that they exist, that you're not the only person who has them. And once you just get started, you find that a lot of it starts to dissipate, because then you get lost into the conversations and get lost into the event, and you get lost into those small goals that you've set for yourself of, I just need to do this. I don't have to be here for an endless amount of time. I don't need to talk to an endless number of people. I just want to have 5 connections today and that's it. So it helps your mind also be put at ease, because there's an end in sight, and there's something that you know that once this checkbox is, I can leave, and then the anxiety will be over and I'll be much happier.
So it sounds like having a clear goal and plan gets you out of the car and actually walk through the door.
Yeah, a lot of it also is I always almost take a +1 to any event that I can, and typically would try to have that person be an extrovert. So I will, if there's an event that I'm going to and that I can take someone with me, I will look through my friend list and say, okay, who could benefit from this, right? Do I know someone who does insurance for commercial buildings? Do I know someone who wants to maybe end up on the Emory board, or someone who's interested in the arts? And we'll call that person up and say, hey, can we hang out? Here's a way that we can do it. There's this event. This is why I think it'll be beneficial for you. More likely than not, I'm able to find someone to come with me. So now have I only committed to the event organizers and the event itself, I've also now committed to a friend of mine who I'm saying, hey, let's go together. And so that also to some extent becomes a, like, what I call a good crutch, because someone who's, I can go in, they'll do a lot of the talking. I can get to do what I want to do and not have to worry about it. And at worst, if I don't see anyone, I know that I can go into the corner and just have a conversation with that individual. So there's a backup plan almost built into it as a result of that. So I almost always try to find a +1 or a friend or someone to go with me to an event, or try to kind of, find someone there who I'm like, oh, I know this person. We can kind of bond, wingman, wingwoman each other, and kind of network together as well. So always trying to have someone else that I've committed to is a big way for me to get in and walk into those events.
Such a good point, because it sounds like it instills accountability. So it's harder to bail and flake on some of these things, but also in being deliberate around who you ask to join you as your +1, right? It sounds like not only an extroverted person that would thrive in that kind of environment, but also someone that would really benefit from whatever the event might be related to, or whoever might be there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And
something.
Go
ahead.
One of the things that people find easier as well is we find it harder to ask for something, but we feel good internally when we ask, right? Or when we give. So it's easier for me to go up to someone and say, how can I help you? Right. And so think about giving, not only being conscious in the person that you're bringing with you, but in when you're meeting people, can you offer something first instead of even having to ask? And that often is a lot easier for people to do. It's a lot easier to give than to receive. It's a lot easier to, help than to be helped mentally. And so that's also something that I'm always looking for in those conversations is, how can I help this person? Can I be of a value add to them? And that makes it a lot easier in my mind and puts away a lot of kind of those thoughts that I have in anxiety.
There's something I want to go back to a little bit. So you mentioned having a +1, or if you know someone that will be there, and having a buddy. If those two things are not really going to happen, or you don't know anyone there, you mentioned something during a conversation earlier about, I think it's floater versus, what was the other one? An anchor. Could you tell us a little bit about what that exactly means, and how to apply it in an in-person event where, like, you don't have a +1 or you don't know anybody?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's, like you said, it's important to understand yourself, right? Are you an anchor or are you a floater? And so the way that I kind of think about it based on the event, if I'm a floater, that's like the definition of a social butterfly. I'm going to have a bunch of short, quick conversations with individuals and kind of pop around the room, shake a lot of hands, get to know a lot of names, connect with a lot of people on somewhat of a surface level, and make a network out of that, right? So a lot of that may look like understanding what your needs are, can I connect you with someone else at that event? So I've often been going to an event where I don't know someone and I'm like, oh, what are you working on now? Oh, you are working on a website. Have you met so-and-so? I just met them. They're actually teaching, young girls how to code. And then I will go and introduce these to people who I may have just met. But because now I'm a giver, people are like, oh, look at this guy. He's a social butterfly. He must have good connections. People are going to then want to come talk to you, right? But it also makes you feel more comfortable again because you are giving. It's a lot easier on your mentality and on the anxiety as well. So social butterfly, going and saying, I'm going to give out 5 cards. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. Anger is kind of someone who's going to really kind of maybe stand still in one position, wait for folks to come to them. So there may be events where I'm like, I don't know anyone here. I don't feel comfortable here. I don't know how to talk to folks here. I'm going to go grab my small plate and my, whatever I'm drinking and like go just stand at a tall boy and wait for someone to come to me. And in that occasion, you have to be kind of, in both of them, really comfortable being uncomfortable, right? And you have to just acknowledge that you're uncomfortable and that it's weird, but just get to be comfortable with that. So I recently went to an event, didn't know anybody there. Nobody really looked like they were in the mood to sharing or having a conversation. Found an individual who was standing alone at a tall boy. I pulled up next to him and said, hey, do you mind if I share the table? Put my food down and just started to eat. Of course, he was like, oh, what's your name? What do you do? We started to have a conversation. Then 2 other folks who really couldn't figure out where to go joined our table. The next thing we knew, we had like 8 people at our small table because everybody is awkward at these things. Nobody really kind of, walks in and is like, I can't wait for this. Well, extroverts maybe, but not a lot of people, right? And so we became anchors by no other reason than just the fact that both of us were loners. We didn't know anybody else. We felt really out of place. And I really just wanted to eat my food because it was freaking delicious, right? And so I was just sitting there doing that, and people will automatically come to you because everyone wants something to do. We all feel awkward. We all want to know what to do with our hands and what to do with our faces and what to do with our cards. And so if you can create an environment, then other people will come to you and you'll get a group of great socially awkward people who are nervous to go talk to other folks, right? And I love talking to individuals like that. And so it became a great networking event for us because there was just 7 of us or 8 of us huddled around this small table because none of us really knew what else to do in that situation.
That's beautiful. That's like the awkward introvert dream come true.
Yes, absolutely.
Like, hey guys, let's just talk about how uncomfortable this whole situation is. Conversation starter right there. Yeah. So is there anything else that goes like aside from just maybe your like just personal disposition or how you're feeling that day? Is there anything else that goes into the decision around that kind of strategy in being a floater versus an anchor?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is really your goals, right? So every event, I always think about what are my goals. So we've got, homecoming is coming up, right? And so at, not to talk about another school, but at this other school.
Our homecoming is this week too.
Right. Yeah. There's a lot of
homecoming
I'm excited about. So, you're trying to meet old friends, right? So this is a great opportunity just to catch up with people. And so I also think about what am I going to ask someone, when I meet them, right? Am I just going to ask them, how are you doing? And then they'll say, well, and then it's like, okay, here's an awkward conversation. So I'll think about, how do you spend the majority of your day today, right? What have you been up to for the past 3 years? What you have any trips coming up? And so I don't jump to the, what do you do now for a living, right? Unless I'm at a networking event with the purpose of work, I try really hard to meet people and introduce people outside of that status quo work. Like I think work takes up way too much of our life and our mental space already, and it's not supposed to. And so I will try to introduce someone with, oh, this is my friend so-and-so. We go hiking together. She is a great XYZ, right? Like, how do we connect with people outside of our work lives? And so, I'm thinking about homecoming now this weekend coming up, right? And so I know that I'm going to ask, what's some exciting trips that you've been on in the past 10 years? Do you have any travel plans coming up? How have you handled COVID, right? What's new in your life? How are you spending the majority of your day? And we'll ask them kind of questions like that, that create a comfortable nature, that create more than a yes, no answer that can help me do that as well. So depending on those, then it's going to be the conversations will get deeper, right? So then I may be kind of, anchored with one person. You can also be a social butterfly and connect with someone where you're like, we have so much to talk about. We're now going to become anchors. So you can switch as well, right? So it's a great question that you asked because there'll be times where I may go meet 10 people and then I just connect with one person so much that I'm like, you and I need to have a conversation for the rest of this event. And we will post up and then switch to anchors. And on the reverse, at this event that I was telling you about the other day, because I had this comfort zone, then I felt more comfortable going out to someone who I was like, do I know you? I feel like we've met at an event, and he and I had met at another event, but I have that confidence because I knew that I had my anchor table to go back to. I could grab a water and go back and it wouldn't be awkward at all, right? So I will, as weird as it sounds, think about these things, right? So I wanted to go approach this individual, didn't feel comfortable going there because it would have been awkward had he said, no, I don't know you. So I'm like, okay, I need another water. I'm going to go say hi to him really quickly. If I don't know him, I'm going to pretend that I was just getting water and come back to my anchor table, right? Like that's literally the process that I have in my head when I'm at these things. And so just being a floater, thinking about what you want and really kind of going from that perspective is how I walk in thinking about what my goal is for the event.
Wow. Okay. So with homecoming this week, number of in-person events happening, and you said it best too, this isn't really necessarily a professional like networking event, but people are so drawn to those kinds of questions around what are you doing and asking about your career development or that sort of thing. Do you think it's like, you think, I guess what I'm asking is like, what's too personal? And you talked about like going in with a goal, and like immediately when you mentioned like, oh, well, I, asked like, how can I help someone? I always think back to like, I don't know, like in a professional like mindset for some reason. But then you just said like actually like connecting people, and not just in the pursuit of your own like relationship building, but like others too. So can you talk a little bit about like how to navigate that, or why we gravitate to just like that professional like lens, even when we're talking about like just with fellow alumni?
Yeah. We will leave the like philosophical conversation for capitalism for another day. That probably has a lot to do with it. But I think, like the reality of our world is that we live to work, right? Instead of, working to live, right? Like work is supposed to be the small part of our life that sustains everything else that we want to do. And really, we trade time for more time, right? I go spend hours at work to make money so then I can do what I want to with that money with my free time, or buy time with money. And so we just are so consumed by it. And that's why we always go back to it. And so I've always kind of preferred the question of like, how are you spending most of your days today? And if the person chooses to talk about work, great. I'm a genuinely curious person as well. And so I think the biggest thing that I take to every event is that sense of curiosity. I always love to learn about random stuff. And sometimes someone will go on about work and be like, I must be boring you. And I'm genuinely curious because I just like to know stuff, because you never know when you're going to be able to connect those dots. So I always ask them, what are you up to today? And if they're talking about work, but I can see that they didn't really want to talk about work, but they don't know what else to talk about, I'll ask them, what do you do after work hours? Like, what have you been up to after you're working, right? And you find out really cool things about people, right? I have a friend who's doing like either woodworking or like working on stand-up comedy or whatever it may be. And then my question always goes to, oh, do you need any help with that? Like, what's the next step? What are you doing? Whatever that conversation may be, it's some form of how can I help, right? And like those 3 to 4 words really change the dynamic, because people often like to talk about themselves when there's an interested party, and 2, then offering them help always makes you feel good. It makes them feel good. You walk away with an emotion that you're going to hold on to, right? I may not remember what that person does exactly for work in this XYZ field, but I will remember that I felt good having a conversation with them. And that person, if I call them 2 years from now for a favor, is also going to be, you know what? Every time I meet Munir, I feel good about it. He's always offering to help. He's always there for me. And I could have done nothing for them by then, but they're going to feel a lot better in this kind of chain of in cycle of like give and take that we live into our worlds, right? And so coming with that sense of curiosity is always good. When people do talk about their work, my favorite question to ask is, what is something that I wouldn't know unless I was in your field? And so I've come out with the coolest conversations from that. And like, I remember a guy who was an architect who developed hotels was like, oh, the service hotel and different hotels, chains are in different corners because of XYZ. And they think about like strategically, they're going to walk, start a room here and go here, and they build this and they do that. And it was such a like interesting, intricate answer that I would have never thought of. And so it's always interesting to get that kind of like, what's the fact of your business that nobody else knows? And so it's a great question that people get excited about because A, they don't get it asked often. B, it's a great way to share something that you probably don't know. And so something for you to learn. And it creates like a good opener for more conversation there as well. I think you're on mute.
Of course. Classic move. If I didn't do that, like, yeah, every time, Rachel. Okay, so I'm just thinking like so coming in with a plan, right? What kind of questions am I prepared to ask? Who am I looking to connect with? And then how I orient myself in the space, my goal around what the outcome is. So we actually have a homecoming mixer tomorrow evening. I think I mentioned this to you the other day, and I think it's like one of the first like in-person events that we have. And in just anticipation, even as a member of the host council and like having a role to serve and connect people, like even the prospect of coming to this gives me anxiety. And so I know this is kind of a ridiculous question, but like starting from, okay, like I give myself a pep talk in the car. I have my list of potential questions that I would ask people that I know or don't know. I guess literally and figuratively, like, what do I do with myself? I think you mentioned this earlier about like, what do I do with my hands? Or like, how, like, do I just smile at everyone and see if they want to talk to me? Like, let's be like literal first in terms of like, okay, I'm walking through the door. What do I do?
Yeah.
Like, how,
Yeah, I think acknowledging the awkwardness is always great. I think name tags are awesome, right? They're a good way to get people started. Always make sure that you're wearing your name tag on the right side. So when you're shaking somebody's hand or fist bumping or elbow bumping, whatever it is, they can see your name clearly. Because I get a lot of anxiety about not remembering people's names. And so when I see a name tag, that immediately is like, okay, this is that person. Step one, help them out, right? And then realizing that you are not the only person who's feeling awkward here. So if you are able to make someone else feel less awkward, because sometimes even when we are like not in a good place, we're still able to lift somebody else up. And so being that person, right, especially if you're on the host committee, something as simple as just going up to someone who's either standing there alone or not kind of like feeling comfortable, you can tell is like in probably the same mindset that you are, and just introducing yourself, right? Of like, hey, I'm XYZ. So glad you came out. What brought you out here? What class are you? Where do you live now? Something simple, right? Just easy peasy. Something that you know is not going to get you anchored into that conversation unless you want to, because then it could be a really boring person. You're like, I didn't want to talk to you at all. Now I am stuck. And so an easy question, right? Like what part, oh, did you fly in for this? Where do you live, right? Quick, peasy, oh, I live here. So great to meet you. Looking forward to seeing you around. Boom, you're in, you're out, you're done. And so I think like that is kind of some of those conversations I have figured, and really being kind of literal about it. Even when I go up to someone, I will make sure that I'm looking them in their eyes, giving them the fist bump, elbow, handshake, whatever we're doing in today's world. But then when I am standing, I position myself as a V. So if this is the person, I'll say hello to them, and then I'll kind of open up the conversation, right? And what that does is that lets your anchor be open to other people as well, right? So if someone else wants to come join, they feel immediately that you both are open to having a third person or a fourth person joining the conversation. And it also lets you more easily leave the conversation if you need to, right? So if you're like, I got to go XYZ, or this person just popped in who I need to meet, or I need to do something, you're not taking up their whole view. So you don't feel bad when you leave, that like, I was this person's world right now. When I leave, it's going to be awkward for them, right? Because it's going to be awkward for them, you know? And so it makes you feel a little easier when you're exiting, because you're like, oh, we were open to this audience. We were observing together. We were able to make commentary together, right? And whatever, as simple as it may be, of like, they did so well with the decorations. I forgot that's what the Panther looks like. Whatever that kind of observation will be that you are doing together, because then it's not just both of you, right? It's both of you and the world. It's both of you and everybody else who's in that room that you're observing and looking at and talking about whatever you may be. And so then it makes it easier for you to also leave the conversation if you need to. And so it's kind of very strategic of even just simply how you stand in that V shape. So that's kind of like, you know, the literal way that I think about stuff. And again, having a lot of these tools and equipping myself with this information makes it a lot easier to walk into these events, because I'm like, I know exactly what I'm going to do to get in and out of a conversation. Right. And then, you know, in the conversation part, I think it's all about asking questions, right? Being curious, being authentic, really bringing your whole self. And, you know, earlier you asked about how personal to get. It really depends on you. So I'm an open book. If someone asks me a question, I really don't hold back on anything. I'll talk about, you know, salary, family, mental stuff, whatever it is. And so like being open and vulnerable first, and allowing that to set the stage, and then letting the person find where they feel comfortable. Someone that I was interviewing earlier last week for a podcast, and I asked them how they really have adapted to so many different race, religions, and cultures. This person knows someone in every aspect of the world and really knows them. And the first person that they said is, I go deep. I don't talk about sports or weather, right? They just don't talk about that. And I've had a lot of friends, because I don't follow sports, always say, you know, I've appreciated conversations with you because they have to be deep, because you don't know about what happened at the sports. Like, you just don't know. And so we can't talk about that. And then we can only talk about the weather for so long, right? So we're going to end up talking about politics or art or something or the other. And so being as deep as you can in those conversations, and really diving in, and not being like, oh, the weather is great today. Sure, you can start off with that, but try to find something that you connect on, whatever that common ground may be, and then dig deeper there, so you'll have more lasting and deeper conversations with that individual as well.
Okay, so it sounds like what you're saying is that as a way of deepening the conversation and building the relationship, that by being vulnerable and open first yourself, then that essentially gives the other person the freedom or latitude to do the same, or at least an invitation to do the same.
Right, absolutely. And think about it as a way, again, of being a giver, right? Think about it of, I can tell that this person is lonely. I can tell that this person is alone, isn't talking to anyone else. I'm going to help relieve some of their social anxiety. And when you start focusing on others, as human nature is, like, we are altruistic people, it makes it a lot easier, because now you're not thinking about, oh, I'm in it for this, or I want to do that. You're just thinking about, I just want to help this person out. They seem super anxious, and I'm anxious as well. So I'm going to see if I can help them out a little bit. And that gets rid of a lot of the anxiety you will find in a really interesting way, and also helps you, you know, kind of start up dialogue as well. So it's always about making that deposit first. And then whatever that relationship is, right, that person's going to be eager to kind of like pay you back, if you will, right? So if you are in a networking event, or if you are going to make an ask of someone, whatever that ask may be, always think about, what is it that I can first deposit, like you have to in a bank, right? Whether it's just not making them feel awkward at this event, maybe it's offering them help. If they're looking for someone, maybe texting 2 or 3 people and seeing if they can help them in whatever ways that it is. How can you first make that deposit before you're asking from someone, is like a good long-term strategy in the business world. And so kind of thinking about that at all of your networking events, whatever the ask or whatever the gift may be.
How can I help? Those 3 words.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it makes sense that by focusing on other people, that you distract yourself from whatever narrative is going on internally, and thereby kind of easing whatever anxiety or concerns that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So in making a deposit, like you said, and seeking to help other people, you said that they, you know, instinctively we all want to kind of pay our debt or support other people that extend help to us. And so, yeah, if I'm going, say, like I'm looking to make connections, looking to get a new job, for example, or making new friends, whatever it might be, how, once I make my deposit and extend help and support in some way, how do I make an ask?
Yeah. So making an ask once you've made a deposit is a lot easier, right? Going to the bank and trying to ask for money that you have just isn't going to happen. And so I'm very open about it. If it's someone that I haven't spoken to in a long time, but I have a good relationship, I'll kind of call it out, be like, hey, it's been so long. Sorry to hit you up out of the blue, but really needed your help with something, right? And making them feel good as well that like you have come to them out of all of these people to ask for their help because you know that they are the person who can do it, right? So making that person also feel special. And these are for individuals that you really maybe haven't talked to in a while, maybe haven't made a deposit in a really long time, kind of the relationship is sitting there stale. And so just calling that out, saying, hey, can we go, out for whatever, if they are someone who you want to hang out with, if they are kind of friends, and seeing if you can kind of refresh that. Now, if this person is really not someone that you hung out with on a regular basis, but are acquaintances or friends enough to make the ask, be sensitive of their time. So if you need them to send a, referral email for you, write that email for them in third person, right? First, ask if you can, and if it's okay, and say, hey, I really wondering if you can, kind of put in a good word for me with your boss. I'm happy to write the email on behalf of you. You can edit it as you want and send it in. 99% of the time, anyone who asks me ever to do something, I come back with them and say, hey, write it for me in third person, attach your resume, attach all that stuff, send it to me and make it easy for me. And if they do that, I'm 100% likely to send it to whoever they need if I feel that they do deserve whatever it may be, right? Because it's made it easy for me to do so. But if you're going to ask me to write something for you, I'm just not going to have the time to do it, right? And so then it'll go on my to-do list, and maybe 3 years from now, I'll be like, oh yeah, you were looking for a job. What was I supposed to do, right? And so you've now made it really hard for me to give back to you. And if it's something where you want their advice, make it again as simple as you can, right? Nobody is like thriving for your $10 lunch or your $5 coffee that you want to take them out to, right? It takes more work for me to figure out a time to do that, to figure out a place to go, than to spend the time to get there, to have that coffee, to talk about all the other BS because you want to make an ask. Just make the ask, be polite, be upfront, call out any awkwardness that happens, and just go in for the ask and say, if you want to talk about it more, I'm happy to jump on a Zoom call, give you a ring, or take you out for coffee or lunch. Make the offers and then let them pick how they want to do it. Don't force a lunch or coffee on them, because that's a lot of wasted time for an individual who may just be willing to help you out but doesn't have time to do so. So make it as easy as you can for them to give you whatever you need, and give them all the tools, your resume, all the emails that you can, and making it as easy as you can for them.
Okay. What about when I'm chatting with someone at an event, whether it be professional or more personal, and I want to either make a future ask or I want to remain in touch? How do I go about, I guess, once we've met and kind of established a connection, how do I guess, I'm thinking of a metaphor, how, I've planted the seed,
right?
How do I go about watering it?
Yeah. So I use my calendar religiously. So if a person tells me, I'm asking them, hey, do you have any fun thing coming up, right? Do you have a trip coming up? Do you have a project launch coming up? Do you have an exam coming up? Whatever that may be, I will typically put that in my Google Calendar, right? So if you told me, for example, that hey, I've got this massive presentation coming up, I would add that to my calendar for either the night before or the morning of, and then I would make sure to text you and say, hey, good luck on that presentation, right? And that does a lot of things. One, it shows that you cared enough to take the time to put that down, to remember it, and to reach out and wish them good luck. Nobody does that in today's world, right? That to me is the equivalent of the handwritten letter, because it holds so much importance for them. Two, it typically gives that person an extra boost of confidence, right? If someone messaged you today and was like, good luck with your program this evening. Like, it always makes you feel a little bit like, oh, that was really nice of them to do that, right? And that gets your endorphins going. So then you have a positive association with this person, right? And as far as I'm concerned, like if someone did that for me, that is a deposit to me in my world, right? That is something that they help me with. And I like to have a clear balance. So for me, I want to figure out how can I help this person back, because this is a good person in my books, right? So I'm itching at the opportunity, especially when presented to me, to help this individual to be like, oh yeah, like you've been there for me. You reach out when I'm doing things. Please let me help you. And like, let's balance this out, right? And so that's always a great way of like making an easy deposit or continuing to water that seed to make sure that that individual is kind of upfront in your mind, right? When I recently became the president of the Emory University Alumni Board, I made sure to take some time before my first meeting, and I texted, I think, about 5 or 6 people who really had mentored me on my way to get there. And I may not have been in touch with all these people for a really long time because they've got busy lives and I didn't want to bother them for no reason. But this was an occasion for me to take time and say, hey, tomorrow is my first meeting. Here's why I wanted to thank you, right? And so while everybody got a thanks, they each got a personal note of to like, you've been there as a mentor for me. You've been there as XYZ for me, right? And so I reached out to, I think, 6 people. And that, again, is like continuing that relationship, right? Thanking them for what they've done, thanking them for the deposit that they have made, right, into you, you know, and knowing that you're going to continue the relationships with them.
Okay, great. So let's just to recap. So I make a plan. I have a goal for myself. I obviously give myself a pep talk in the car. And then text my dear friend Munir, like, thanks so much for all these tips. I'm about to walk into this mixer. We'll see how awkward I am. But no, I go in. You said I put my name tag on my right shoulder, right?
Yep.
Well, you know what? For me, and I guess like you're not the person to ask, but crazy hair problems get all up in the mix when it comes to name tags. I'll save that for another conversation. But the way that I orient myself in the room in terms of like making a V shape as a means of kind of being open and welcoming folks. There were 2 things that kind of came up, and I'm just like thinking like in the moment or like past experiences where like I've had a lot of trouble exiting a conversation and then also like entering a conversation. Mm-hmm. So like exiting a conversation where there's just like one person and they're like, you know, like laser beams, like there's no way you're getting out of here alive, basically. I mean, like that's how I feel about it. But and then alternatively on the other side is there's a group of people, like I'm imagining like you at like a high table around, you know, like there's like a handful of people around, everyone's like laughing or whatever. And then like I'm that chick that's like, I'm trying to get in that conversation, but like not be weird about it, you know?
Yeah.
So I guess that's like a 2-part question, but let me get your thoughts around those 2 circumstances.
Yeah. So I think, again, trying to stand in the V as much as you can is always great. And when you're wanting to exit, it really depends on what your, you know, reasoning is, right? Do you need to go to the bathroom? Do you need to take a phone call? Are you just done with this conversation? Did you just see someone else that you have to see? So I will always kind of, you know, make that point of like, it was so great seeing you. I'm so looking forward to seeing you around, right? And that really gives that person a flashing clue if they're tuned in that, okay, this person has to go, you know? And then I will go do X, Y, or Z, whatever it is, or whatever the reason is that I need to leave a conversation. And I think a lot of folks, especially younger folks, have this like built-in guilt when we leave a conversation because it doesn't seem appropriate or whatever. But I think we shouldn't have to feel forced to have a conversation that we don't want to. You know, if you don't have the energy for it, whatever that reasoning is, you know, we're seeing a question that came in live of what should we do if we're at an event mid networking and we feel overwhelmed or feel our energy running out, right? And I think, you know, very similar to your question, right?
Yeah.
So I have also so many times, and I can't believe I'm really giving this away, but I think I'm not the only person who does this. pretend to have a phone call or a text message, and will walk out. Like I will literally grab my phone that nobody is calling, and I will pretend that someone is calling, or I'll call someone who I can and just walk out of the place and go outside for fresh air, right? And then depending on like if there are people out there, I'll walk further away so I can just be alone and kind of recoup and mentally think. I tried to have, I don't have a better word for this yet, but like an outer body kind of like thought process of like, okay, what is it that is making me feel uncomfortable? Do I just not know anybody there? Am I the only person who's of like South Asian descent here? Am I the only man here? Am I XYZ, whatever that is? And think about why I am anxious specifically at this event. What were my goals for this event? How far am I from reaching those? Am I satisfied with where I am? Am I going to go home, put on my PJs and Netflix and be like, damn, I wish I'd stayed just for another 20 minutes, right? Is my future self going to regret this? So I'll kind of have a conversation with myself about it and then figure out how I want to leave. And if I don't feel up to it, then leave, right? Because if you force yourself to do something that you really don't want to do and you're not authentically going to be there, then your networking isn't going to be good. Your conversations aren't going to be good. You're not going to have a good time. And then it's going to become harder for you to go to an event next time.
Right.
So better to know when to call it quits and kind of leave if you want to. And instead of like really kind of being there and struggling through something that you don't need to. Entering a conversation, I think is a little harder when there's a group of people, especially if those group of people are friends and are already connected and you're the odd person out. It's a lot easier in kind of the example that I gave earlier where it was a bunch of random folks. And so it was much easier for someone to join, right? But I always kind of play that person of like, I need help. Can y'all come rescue me? And so I'll come in and be like, do y'all mind if I join you really quickly? Do you mind if I jump in? And kind of have this opportunity for the group to be like, yeah, sure. We'd love to welcome someone onto our rescue boat, right? And give them that chance to kind of like welcome you in. And hopefully the group is also gracious enough to ask you a question or two, right? To kind of get that conversation going. And if there's a particular person in that group that you want to speak to, because that happens a lot, right? Where you're awkwardly standing behind them. They're in conversation mode. You're like, I got to talk to this person. This person's got to do the business that I need. There's no one else that I can talk to, right? And so I will try to, instead of stand behind them, go in front of them and behind the other person. Because the mistake that everybody always makes is they'll stand behind me. I have no idea that you're there. I'm in a conversation, right? And you're there like now for 20 minutes just sipping on your drink because you're like, this guy doesn't hurry up. I don't know what to do. So I'll go on the other side, make eye contact with that person and kind of let them know of like, hey, I'd love to speak to you when you have a moment, right? And just put that kind of like mental chip in there and let that little bird bother that person. Now be like, what does this person want, right? And let their curiosity get the better of them to then come to you to be like, hey, what do you need? How can I help, right? And kind of let them do maybe the more difficult lifting part because it's easier for them to leave a conversation and come to you because they have now an excuse to be like, I got to go talk to this person. And so many times I've found people are like, I was trying to figure out a way to get out of that conversation. Thank you for saving me. Right. Wow. So many times that has happened as well. So again, be polite, be considerate of other people, right? And just remember, how can you make it easier for them to do whatever it is that you need them to do?
You are such a guru at this. Like, it's just like, it's almost instinctive, but it all makes sense, right? Like, start with really what your why is and come into it, and regardless of the event, with seeking to help and support other people. And I love how, I'm very proud of you because it sounds like you've cultivated a lot of mindfulness along the way when it comes to that question around, hey, my social energy is completely depleted, or I'm feeling overwhelmed, or kind of panicking right now, and kind of taking a moment to yourself to, one, recognize those feelings and how it shows up for you in your body, but then also kind of acknowledging and really investigating the feeling.
Yeah.
Right. So like, what's the driver? What's the trigger of this? And just getting like really curious about it to really seek to understand what's going on.
Yeah. And at this wedding that we were at, you and Jordy found me outside, on the balcony alone. And that's exactly what I was doing. I was like, this is a lot. I can't take all this in, right? It's been 3 days of wedding stuff. I just need
Oh
to
yeah.
go outside, right? And that's literally what I did. I just went outside, smaller group of people, right? You and Jordy came out and we hung out, and I was like, this is perfect, and then that just replenishes you and really makes it easier to kind of go to the next event when you need to, instead of really beating yourself up for no reason, and something that almost all of us go through often.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and it's like you're not going to show up the way that you can or the way that you want to either.
Right. Absolutely.
Well, we have a few more minutes for any other incoming questions. We've tried to kind of throw them in the conversation throughout this last hour or so. But in the meantime, do you have any, I don't know, like final thoughts for us as we start to come to a close?
Yeah. So there's a lot of things that I take with me when I go to these events as well, right? And they're words that I kind of try to remember, and there are a lot of them. So I'll try to go through them. And if you don't remember all of them, that's fine. Just pick 2 or 3 of these and make those your guiding star, right? Make those your North Star. You don't need to do all, how many ever I kind of state here, but figure out what 2 or 3 are really going to be kind of what you're going to embody and take in and go to those events with you. So I always start off with being curious, right? I'm naturally a curious person, which helps. But even if you're not, ask questions. People love to talk about what they're doing, and they often don't have an audience to do so. So ask questions, be curious as much as you can. Be compassionate and considerate, right? So when you're talking to someone, know that they're probably also feeling socially anxious, or if you're asking someone to do something with you, be considerate as much as you can. And walking in with that also just makes you feel as a giver, right? It makes you feel a lot better when you're doing it. Connect with the person as much as you can at a deeper level, and really try to have a connection that goes past anything surface level. And it can be vacations that they take, where they went to school, where they live, what they're doing, politics, arts, whatever that is. Try to find that connection with someone that's going to be your thing. That's going to be just something that you and that person is probably going to talk about, because nobody else in that room is going to be like, oh, you're also an Android lover? Let's talk about how much we ate Apple, folks, right? Like, figure out what that like random connection is going to be that you can.
Shots fired.
That you could have with someone, right? It can be something literally as goofy as that. Also being comfortable, being uncomfortable, acknowledging it, letting that kind of wash over you. I often get really like warm when I'm uncomfortable, and will get like hot and sweaty. And I'll just take a moment and be like, all right, you're uncomfortable. It's a little weird right now, but that's okay. You're not the only person. Honestly, nobody here gives any f's about you. And so like, just stop thinking that you're kind of the center of attention and everybody is talking about you, right? And so having this kind of like mindful conversations with yourself. There's also this concept of borrowed confidence, right? Of there's someone out there who is confident in you enough to invite you to this, to hire you, to work with you, to be your friend. Borrow the confidence from your friends and then walk into it, right? So because now I've kind of been this like social butterfly that my friends think I am, I walk in that with that feeling of like, man, my friends believe in me, right? They think I'm a social butterfly. I can, kind of fake it until I make it. And the last thing that I'll leave you with, because I was thinking a lot about this at the wedding, is the wedding speeches, right? We had this phenomenal wedding. It was like 3 days of a like Hindu Jewish wedding, just absolutely extravagant, beautiful food, drinks, everything was great. And over and over and over again, what I heard, the best part of the wedding was the speeches, right? And as a debate coach, I would have rated those speeches very low, because they were stumbling, they were murmuring, they weren't talking to the mic, they were looking at each other, their backs were to people. Everything that you could imagine from a statistical like standpoint was wrong with these speeches. But what wasn't wrong with either of them was that they were authentic. They brought who they were to that speech. They brought themselves, and they were vulnerable to it. And that's what everybody loved, right? Both the speeches from the parents were everybody's favorite part. And over and over at our table, people were like, this is my favorite part. This is my favorite part. Oh my God, those were so good. when we go get the food, everybody's like, man, those speeches were amazing, right? Because they were authentic. And so forget everything else, bring your true self to this, be vulnerable, and just be authentic. And I promise you that your experiences will be much better. And as a result, once you get started, your anxiety will go away.
Wow. Yeah, and I mean the root of true connection and meaning in our relationships is that authenticity. So in, getting hung up around how I should be or what I should say detracts from actually having a meaningful connection with folks.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Munir, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for always being willing to give and share, and especially thank you for sharing a little bit about your background, and I don't know, just giving introverts like me a little bit more confidence in navigating this kind of thing, especially with just the last year or so and the impact that the kind of social isolation has had on all of us. And I have to remember that, like, I am not alone. We are not alone. And that's really what brings us all together. So, with that, again, thank you, Munir. Such an honor to have you with us. Everyone at home, thank you all so much for joining us this evening. We do have a Young Alumni Mixer tomorrow evening at Ormsby's. So be sure to register if you haven't already, and it is a perfect opportunity to kind of put some of these tips into practice. You can also visit us on our website at alumni.gsu.edu for other upcoming events. But happy homecoming, and thank you again for joining us. Have a good night, and happy connecting, happy homecoming. Thank you.